And this one is on vaccination. As a short background, I just came back from Israel after 4 intense months taking care of my family, after having lost my twin sister. The chaos of the family and the collective energy of the whole situation, and specifically now around the theme of the vaccination, was putting me at the edge of a psychosis. I felt like a second-class citizen being against the vaccination. What is your perspective on vaccination? What is my perspective on vaccination? First, I'm not at all qualified to speak about it from the place of what would be considered as that validated ground in collectively shared consensus today, because I don't have that medical training, you see? So please use this as a disclaimer. Whatever I will say, it's only applicable to what I feel needs to be highlighted here through this question, and not as an answer whether to be vaccinated or not, okay? So please make that distinction. That whole question of vaccination is a big one, of course, not just today. It's been a big one for a while. It's been around. For example, when in my personal life, when our first daughter was born with Amrita Madevi, we were in Uzbekistan, and she would have to be vaccinated in the first, the first 4 weeks, and then a whole bunch of vaccines in the course of first 2 months of her life. Up to 4 months, she would have had to be vaccinated by various kinds of vaccines that routinely administered in that part of the world. However, we have resigned from that, and our daughter was not vaccinated against anything. We even had to sign the papers so as to carry the full responsibility, because that was required. Maybe we were in a more privileged position because we were British citizens at the time, living in Uzbekistan, where I was when I was working for 4 years. So it was easier for us, perhaps. But we know that a lot of people whom we knew, they had much less choice, much less to say. Some of their children were almost, we could say, forcibly vaccinated, because that's part of the way how these vaccines were administered. We have seen even some very undesirable, and in certain cases, very down sides of these vaccines, which resulted in delay of certain, the development of a child. So what am I trying to say here is this. What is my perspective on vaccination? Aside from the economical and political reasons, which of course we cannot discard, there are reasons that are rooted, of course, in that shared consensus of reality, where what we have in terms of that progress, in terms of that what is called medical system, and how it views the individual, how it treats the individual, and therefore the creation of these vaccines is not separate from that whole paradigm of what constitutes human being in the environment, rise of certain illness, of certain disease, of certain alignment that needs to be treated. Whereas my perspective comes from this, well, dare I say, more holistic and time-tested understanding. In this case, I will speak now with regard to what Tantra here utilizes and uses as the platform. And in this case, Tantra, as a Tantra and Yoga have a sister science in Ayurveda, that science of life, that ancient wisdom of how to live in balance with nature. And that balance doesn't end only at the level of personal care, personal hygiene, personal diet, or even personal relationships. It goes further. It speaks about the whole entire relationship between microcosm and macrocosm. It speaks about the relationship between human being and their environment. It speaks about actions performed. It speaks about accumulated result of these actions, known as karma in that field. So no illness and no disease, especially when we speak at the level of pandemics, are ever viewed in isolation from the way society lives at large. So these are the premises upon which the human then being is treated. What goes into the vaccine and how the certain vaccine works? Again, some of you, I'm sure, have much greater understanding, especially if you have a respective background. But it is a far cry from what, let's say, in other sister science of Ayurveda works on, known as homeopathy. Homeopathy works at the principle that what in very, very small dosage still is part of what could be a poison for the body, when given at a respective gradation of that dosage, can reinforce the ability of the body, of the immune system, to restore the balance, whether this homeopathy against cold, stomachache, toothache, headache, liver problems, anything. There's no end. A good homeopath treats entire physiology. So, does the creation of vaccination follows that homeopathic principle? Is the vaccination based on giving some shot to the body where the body's immune system will become more intelligent when dealing with the pathogen represented by this or that? This is a big question. And I think there was quite an intelligent conversation between these two very public figures. It's not the endorsement of the pros, but it was very enlivening and very, very enlightening conversation that took place between Deepak Chopra and Sadhguru some time ago, maybe as far as a year ago, but when the conversations on the necessity of coming up with the vaccine began. Check that out. This conversation speaks about the limitations of any vaccine and whether all vaccines will work in the way they're meant to work. So coming closer to answering where I personally stand with regard to the vaccination is that it completely goes against the very principle of understanding what here is responsible for the health of the organism, health of the society, and health in terms of what the health represents. Let me give you a little excerpt from where and how Tantra views anything to do with how the illness or disease manifests itself. Whether Ayurveda sees this as the imbalance that begins at the level of elementary order, because that's what humas, the so-called doshas, represent, because doshas themselves are already a mixture of the elements, and the purpose and the very goal of Ayurveda is to keep the balance of the elemental order, to remain in the balance, seasonal, psychological. Obviously, the food here is 99% of what and how one works with that, because food we eat becomes everything, the energetic component and the very cells in our body. And more than that, the food that we eat, every item of food carries the information field. And that information field in itself is an expression of these great elements. So, for example, carrot has a certain energetic expression in terms of the minute combination of the elements, therefore it will be acting on the body in increasing one of the existing dosha in question. Dosha is that huma. It's that constitutional setup of these elements. And Ayurveda deals with the 5 elements here, including ether. So this, whatever we eat, from a peanut to a single sunflower seed, to a sumptuous meal with all the spices and greens and this and that, all this all together forms that what either contributes to the increase, decrease, balance, or conflict. So self-mastery and self-healing in Ayurveda always considers what you eat, because this Ayurvedic axiom, my wife would remind me, but if there is no food, if there is no good food, there is no use of any medicine, something like that. And if the food is if we eat in accord with nature, then what use of the medicine? So something like that, you see. So in other words, there's no healing unless we radically change something in the way we nourish ourselves. And likewise, if we nourish ourselves well, then very little medicine is needed. No medicine is needed. But in Tantra, the perspective goes completely at the level of energy. So in Tantra, the understanding that everything in the body is a result of the pranic movement. So everything in the body is a result of the functioning of the 5 principal pranas. This is, by the way, Ayurveda in depth also speaks about that. Of course, I should have said that right away, because it's not good to distinguish. I was just giving you that maybe more advanced understanding that all this boils down to the way the pranic currents function in the body. Any deviation will sooner or later result in some form of illness, in some form of discomfort, in some form of whatever that is, displaying itself as not functioning, as resulting in pain and so forth. There's no way out of it. It's the distribution, the seed and the movement of pranic currents. 5 altogether that conduct all functions in the body. In other programs and courses, we speak about this in greater depth, because this is a yogic science, of course. It's inseparable from the understanding of how consciousness functions here. So all this is being reminded. So if this understanding, if one have this understanding, and one understands that what really is at the very basis, at the basis of health, then all these allopathic applications, including vaccination, is incompatible with this, in my view, more holistic perspective. But then again, with that being said, if our lifestyle requires us to travel, if our lifestyle requires us to be in contact with people where this is subjected to necessities, both actual necessities in terms of being able to travel, and B, the psychological repercussions of being in contact with people who know that you have undergone the vaccination, so therefore you're a safe specimen to be around if you are a high flyer and you fly all over the place, so you better be vaccinated. But my perspective on vaccination, you could be asking me, what's my perspective on big pharma? What's my perspective on the whole allopathic medicine? I will give you a shortest answer. Crime against wisdom. Crime against humanity. Crime against common sense. Why? Because it treats, I don't even know what it treats. It trying to pretend, it dissects minutely every department and compartment of a human being, thinking that it can find solution to something which might originate at the level which has nothing to do in cutting, dissecting, diverting, or biochemically manipulating this or that tissue, this or that organ. You see? And at the same time, I spoke also about this at length, not long ago, just as far as 2 years ago, for a London Hill platform with Tatiana Kasasinov on various levels of healing, on various levels, because there are different levels where disease can originate, therefore different levels from where the healing would have to be assisted. So take it with a pinch of salt. That's my stand on not just vaccination, that's my stand on the entire, thing of how today the medical system works. That's not an encouragement for you to stop going to seeing a doctor if you have to. But it's a global issue here. So we don't want to miss an opportunity to address it.